Hey, welcome to episode 3 of our read-along of Donald Ray Pollock's Knockemstiff, not Knockemsniff. Although maybe that is an appropriate mistake considering some of these stories that we are about to go into. But just a reminder, if you are not on our Discord, please join. It's completely free and we can discuss this book in more detail. So with that said, let us dig into the first story here, Schott's Bridge. Now, I really love this story. It was a tragic tale of a man named Todd, a boy named Todd, I guess. And we are reunited with Frankie from our pills story. And this is a story of loss, friendship, betrayal, and tragedy. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed this one. This was a great short story. I know we had a couple that were decent that we read last time, but this one to me really elevated the story. It brought this novel, this collection of stories, back to where it was when we first started. But the one different thing here is that it's a different kind of quality. When we started this book, it was gritty, it was crude, it was kind of just gut-punching, in-your-face writing. This one's a little bit more thoughtful. It gets into the heads of these characters and gives them more dimension. When I first started this book, I really was laughing out loud a lot, even though there were quite a few profound lines that Donald Ray Pollock put in here. This one definitely hit me as well, but not so crudely, let's say. So let us begin with Schott's Bridge. And we begin with Nettie Russell. She died in the spring and left her grandson Todd an old Ford Fairline and a Maxwell House coffee jar with $2,000 in it, a fair sum of money in 1973. And she wished him to go away when she said, "Toddy, you never did belong here. You take this and you go somewhere else before you get hurt." And that is a little bit of foreshadowing because, as we know, Todd does stay in town. He has a friendship, what he wishes would be more than a friendship, with our friend Frankie here. And we're introduced to Frankie right here. When Frankie was rough as a cob and liked the split tails. Todd talked like a prissy girl in a beauty pageant and walked on his toes like his feet were full of glass. And there's some more amazing Donald Ray Pollock descriptions. These three stories, there's some, I highlighted as many as I thought without getting too insane into the details, but I'm completely in love with these descriptions, these similes and things that he comes up with. They're totally immersive. They're totally unique to this book, this kind of storytelling, these kind of characters and setting. So what does that mean? That means Todd is gay. It implies it anyway. We don't realize that until later on, but it does come to pass. And we know Claude, who is his uncle, he has pitched Todd's clothes out into the muddy yard and told him to hit the road. "Mom would let me kick you out when she was alive, but she can't stop me now," he told his nephew. So that is the impetus, that is the catalyst for this story, for Todd to leave, go out on his own. So what does he do? Well, there's some guys having a bonfire. He sits down alone in the canopy of a willow tree, and Frankie shows up, and he says, "Hey, let's get out of here. Let's go eat." And he says, "Why?" "Because I'm hungry." And so off they go. And I love this moment here. His rotten breath filled the front seat. And I've experienced that with people in my life. And so, again, I'm just constantly amazed by these things that really just give you pause, right? They're descriptions that really just put you in the space, in the setting, and sitting down here in the front seat with Frankie and Todd. And then we bring up the Super Bee that Frankie owned and that Bobby rode in as well, in pills, and he owned it when he was 17, and now it has been destroyed. And these two guys, they go off to a fish camp, rented, and it was just 2 moldy rooms and a screened-in porch. And here we go. There's more interesting details that I love about this, and actually this detail comes into play later on regarding Todd, but I'll get there. Hopefully I highlighted that part. But somebody had drawn a life-size stick family on the wall with crayons. All the faded figures had blood pouring from their mouths. But these guys are living in squalor. They're barely scraping by. They have some money. Todd really, he keeps this money hidden. He doesn't show it to Frankie, and he hides it right here behind the rock in the well. And here is our first mention of Schott's Bridge. The fish camp overlooks Schott's Bridge, the easiest way in or out of Holler. And that means a lot right there. I didn't think about that until I'm coming back and actually looking at it. But we know that was Todd's way out of the Holler, right? I mean, he was betrayed at the very end by his friend and committed suicide. But let's hold off. We'll get there eventually. We'll get there soon. But it's great when you go back and you look at things like this in books and stories, and you can see that all of the subtle foreshadowing here. Like I didn't pick that up. I was picking that up as just a literal statement. But then now in hindsight, you go back and you're like, oh man, I really see what he was getting at there. And I think that's what's interesting about literature a lot is as you can revisit it, and it's the same with film. But you can revisit it over and over and over again and find new things every time. And that's really part of the reason why I love doing this read-along book club, because it allows me to read more carefully, go back as I talk through it, and then pick up these cool little things. Then obviously you guys out there too, always reading with a group of people is more fun because you guys may pick up on things that I didn't. So it's always a great learning experience. So, and this is the first pivotal moment here. Once after mixing beer and whiskey all morning, Frankie pressed his pistol to the back of Todd's head and ordered him to jump. And he realized, go ahead and shoot, you son of a bitch, Todd said. I'd be dead anyway. He could barely dog paddle, let alone high dive from 40 feet. And then Frankie, he doesn't shoot him, obviously. He stops and he says, you can't be a pussy all your life, Todd. Someday you're going to just have to say, fuck it. And we know the end of the story and the end of Todd. But I want to talk about some stuff when we get there. There's some interesting things, some techniques that Donald Ray Pollock used that weren't so obvious. And so Frankie, we know he goes see this old woman, lived over in Masseyville. He lost all his confidence around pretty women after his face got made. Oh yeah, that's what I forgot to bring up. Frankie, he got in an accident and he just has this massive scar. I believe he refers to people calling him Frankenstein in one part of this. So the hag didn't give a damn what he looked like as long as he could make his hog legs stand up. On Sunday evenings, he'd come back to the fish camp bruised with denture marks and loaded down with food she'd packed for him. Dusty jars of preserves, bread snacks of bloody turtle meat, sometimes a soggy pie. So again, just so much detail, so much rich detail in these stories. And I think that I keep telling myself this. I need to go back. I need to watch some interviews with Donald Ray Pollock to see how much of this he experienced versus how much of this thing were sort of just rumors. But this is the kind of detail I feel like you have to have experienced it or at least soaked it in, lived there for years. I suppose you could make up stuff like this. And for myself, I think as a writer, I'm really learning a lot about just the importance of detail, how special it is to a reader. I didn't realize it until I'm reading this because most writers don't write like this with this amount of detail, with this amount of color. And I think that's what makes this book special as well as his other writing. And this is where our stories, our anthology, these stories cross paths again when Frankie asks him, how did you figure out you was funny? He's talking to Todd. And we learn about, it was that Vista man. We learned about who came to build the baseball diamond, if I remember right. For Todd, it had seemed as if everything about the Vista man, his hair, his skin, even his glass eye, had glowed in the soft colored light coming through the cheap stained glass of the church. He had never met a man so beautiful, nor one so friendly. Within 2 weeks, he found himself high on weed and naked in the back seat of Gordon's beat-up Ford station wagon, and nearly every night after that for the rest of the summer. I love this description, right? It's just such a beautiful description of having an attraction towards somebody, right? It wasn't immediately sexual, but what's great about it, too, is the contrast. It starts out, his hair, his skin, even his glass eye glowed in the soft-colored light coming through the cheap stained glass of the church. So it's heavenly, it's beautiful, but then it's contrasted directly after that. Within 2 weeks, he found himself high on weed and naked in the back seat of Gordon's beat-up station. So that's great stuff. I love that technique when on one hand he's illustrating how awestruck he was when he saw this guy named Gordon, and then it turned very sexual and a little more crude, a little bit what we're used to in this story here. Or this set of stories. But we know what happened is Gordon had promised him that he'd take him away when he finished the ball diamond and headed back to New Jersey. And Todd was young enough to believe that he was telling the truth. And of course, we know that didn't happen. Todd remained behind, and we know that he'll never leave Knockemstiff, unfortunately, despite the fact that he had enough money to start a new life. And this I highlighted because, man, this was super gross, but man, it really caught my eye. By that time, Frankie's liver stuck out from his side like a baby fist and often throbbed like a toothache. I mean, Frankie he's not in great shape whatsoever. And again, I'm sorry I keep repeating this, but I'm just loving these descriptions here. And we get another callback, not only with Frankie, but with something that Frankie did. So back 4 or 5 years ago, he said one night, I ate a raw chicken, guts and all. And hopefully that's what he's talking about with the moment with the fire when Bobby was out there looking up at the plane. And I'm really starting to see the power of anthology fiction, and it really makes me want to tell a story like this because there's something so interesting about it, how all of these paths are interconnected. And you can do this, plenty of authors do this with just a straightforward novel where you have POV chapters over and over existing in the same world, but there's something just different and interesting about this way because they're attached, but they're detached. Their paths cross, but they're not necessarily running in parallel. It's just about life. It's about, one person meets another person, and it may mean something, it may not, and those other people may know some other people, and it's not necessarily driving toward a massive plot, but you can see certain things have affected other characters and brought them where they are today. So I really love this form of storytelling, and I hope I can discover more books like this. And here's where things turn. So ever since he told Todd, that is, the story about the Vista Man, it seemed as if things had turned to shit between them. And he suddenly realized he no longer had any fantasies about Frankie and him making a life together. That's really what's sad about this whole thing, man. I really like Todd, and he's a sweet soul. He's a sweet guy, and he just wants to have a nice life. He's got this money. He's really nice to Frankie, even though Frankie's kind of a piece of shit to him. I mean, even, put a gun up against his head while he was on the bridge. But here is the turning point. This is when things are kind of, falling apart for him. And I love this description too, right here. When Frankie jumped and knocked him off his chair onto the floor, he kicked and tried to break loose and then felt nothing but a small black hole that fit around him like a sleeve. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but it makes complete sense in the context of what's happening here as he's losing consciousness. But after a while, he woke up lying on his belly on the bloody floor with his jeans down around his ankles. He rolled over and spit out his loose tooth. Frankie was standing over him, wiping his dick off with a rag. So yeah, Frankie raped him. It's such a weird thing because you don't know if Frankie really had feelings for him, or if it was like a prison situation where he's like, hey, this is all I got. All I have is this other hag, this disgusting lady, and this guy's better than that. I really don't know. But then, of course, he turns, what are you grinning about, you little faggot, Frankie said. Then he stomped down hard on Todd's face with the heel of his work boot, man. And then when he finally wakes up, Frankie is gone, along with the Ford and the jar of money. So Todd is left alone in this shitty house. And I love this too because we have this image of this family on a wall, and it came to kind of represent something. And it's interesting how all of the family had blood coming out of their mouths, and then we end up, that's exactly what happened to Todd, where he's spitting out his tooth after being raped by Frankie. And he heads out to Schott's Bridge. The meaning of the story finally comes to light. So it was Slick, with his arms held out away from his body, he slowly made his way to the middle. Then he stopped and stared down into the black water for a long time, feeling the first tiny rushes of the acid streak through his brain. Todd lit his last cigarette, last being the term, because we never see him jump. We never witness that whatsoever, but it's implied right here, and that's what I like about it, right? He basically told you he jumped without telling you he jumped, and I thought that was a pretty cool technique there. So Todd lit his last cigarette and smoked it almost down to the filter. Then he let it drop, and the burning orange coal fell through the damp air. As he stood there, aching with sorrow and regret, he watched the water swallow it. I absolutely love this story. I'd wager to say this is probably my favorite story so far. It's just so meaningful. It has a lot of depth. It has a lot of foreshadowing, symbolism, and it's introducing us to a new character by bringing back another one. I just really enjoy this. So let me know what you guys think about this one. Did you enjoy it as much as I did? It hit you as hard as I did? Did it have the kind of depth that you were looking for moving forward deeper into this collection of stories? Well, let us move on to Lard. And I only highlighted this here because it was interesting why they named the story after Lard, which is the fat guy that they like to throw darts at his belly, who's in love with the album, the record that he has. But anyway, I highlighted because I noticed it was kind of on mission. So we have a boy named Dwayne, who his father really wants him to get laid. So let us begin with the first line. Everyone in Knockemstiff, Ohio thought that Dwayne Myers was going out with his first real woman that night, but he was just blowing smoke. He'd spread the rumor all over the holler, then covered them. This is great. I love this part too. The detail. He spread the rumor all over the holler, then covered the major details of the Torch Drive-In, which we've been to before. Smeared a glob of ketchup across the back seat of his father's Chrysler. Spilled some wine on a pair of his sister's ragged panties, even branded 2 hickeys on his neck with a metal spoon that he heated up with a Zippo lighter. And then what I want to say is omniscient is because we get into Clarence, his father's POV to a degree. So when he says, one time I fucked a mud dauber's nest, I was so goddamn horny. And his dad is just he's so obsessed with getting Dwayne laid. And even at work, right? Even the guys at Clarence's job are giving him shit. Every day they waited until Clarence walked into the lunchroom and then started blowing off about finding dry chiz sparkling like donut glaze. Again, these descriptions. In the back seat of their junior's muscle car, used rubbers lying in the driveway like fat dad slugs. And we, in the third story, actually, I noticed there was I think it was a salted slug reference, but we'll get there. We'll get there. They keep feeding the old man new insults to throw at Dwayne, faggot, poofer, fudge packer. And he's just completely obsessed with this. But then what happens? Well, two of Dwayne's friends show up. They pick him up in a car. Wimpy and what was the other guy's name? Porter, I believe. Yeah, Porter. And they find this girl. Let's say she's a mentally handicapped girl, and they go have sex with her. They indeed are about ready to, I think they called it a train, if I remember right. Yes, a train. Porter shrugged, took a drag on a cigarette, and said, well, she ain't much to look at, but she sure likes to spread them. And then Wimpy says, yeah, that's why they call her peanut butter. I don't know, man. It's funny how he comes up with these things. I don't know if he thinks about them often. I don't know if they're things he heard, but there's just these things that just are so perfect in this. But we know Dwayne doesn't go through it. I ain't him, Dwayne said, staring down at the big wet spot in the middle of the back seat. Wimpy shook his head. Yeah, Dwayne, what you want to do? He said, lighting a joint. End up like crazy Lard in his goddamn share. This is when we learn about Lard. We're a bit of a way into the story, and we finally find the title character. But it's Nancy, Dwayne corrected. Almost everyone made fun of Lard McComas. So he's a big fat guy, and he's in love with Nancy Sinatra, the famous singer. And but though was a couple of bricks shy of a load, Dwayne still considered him sharper than Wimpy any damn day. So we're back after the movie, the solo movie with Dwayne, and he's going back. He heads off, and he meets up with his friends, and he finds them just smoking a bong in this barn with Larder, our buddy Larder, and they're throwing these shaved off hip darts at his belly while he sits there with his bibs around his ankles, holding this album affectionately against his chest, and he brings it up because he doesn't want to get his eye poked out. He said his grandma will be very upset if he loses his eyesight. But yeah, a few feet away, Porter and Wimpy were passing a bong back and forth and tossing an occasional dart at the huge ball of fat. The darts were special ones with points that have been ground off until they were only an inch or so long. And this is when Dwayne makes up the story about this girl he met. Oh, before we get there, though, I wanted to talk about this thing. So Dwayne didn't just reply. He wrapped his lips around the mouth of the bong and sucked up smoke through everybody's spit. Man, I'm telling you, it's funny because I would never think to really write that. But man, that detail just adds so many more layers to this whole thing. And not only that, but following, the weed tasted vaguely of potato chips. In the light, he could see the crumbs swirling in the bubbling waters like tiny sea monkeys. He shuddered and then took another hit. Oh, and the girl, I forgot the girl's name that Dwayne is making up. It's Maple McAdams. And I love it because he'd been concocting this persona for so long. As soon as he had learned that Dwayne was taking girl to the Torch Drive-In on Friday night, Porter had asked, what's her name? But then Dwayne had spent weeks thinking up a name, went over 1 million of them in his head before finally stumbling across the perfect one. Already, he'd fallen in love with it, got hard every time it rolled off his tongue. And I love this because this is sort of his connection to Lard, because Lard, he's in love with this make-believe, well, not make-believe woman, but this album, this inanimate object that represents someone, and Dwayne is falling into the same trap. And indeed, falling in love with this fictional person. And everybody passes out, but Dwayne and Lard have this interesting conversation. I love it when he says, I want to trade? Trade what? I trade you my Nancy for your Maple. And that's a big deal, right? Because we know Lard's been in love with Nancy for so long. And he says, you don't want to do that, Lardy, Dwayne said. Why not? Lard asked. He was still staring up at the rafters. Because she's your girl, always has been. Heck, she's better than any old Maple. Oh, Dwayne, Lard said with a yawn. Nancy ain't even real. She's just some old picture my granny gave me. And again, I love this subtext here because, you know, we know Maple is not real. And again, the beautiful final paragraphs of these stories, they really just kind of, they hang out there. Open-ended, but they leave you with something. So as the sound of the train died away, the wind suddenly picked up, rattling the dry weeds in the field across the road. The cool air tingled on his blistered neck. He saw his parents' porch lights flash on, then off again. Looking up, he searched out the brightest star throbbing in the sky above Knockemstiff, then drew back and flung one of the darts at it. He kept throwing them as hard as he could until they all had disappeared into the darkness that surrounded him. This one, again, I think it had some depth to it. It wasn't as impactful to me as the first one, as Schott's Bridge, but this had some good stuff into it. It reminded me of like the pressure of being a kid and maybe living with a dad like that who wants you to become a man to get laid, essentially. And also the peer pressure from your friends. You know, you have all these shitty friends and they're giving you crap all the time, and you go to the lengths that poor Dwayne did here to appear as if he got a woman. But so I think it's a great commentary on that, about the peer pressure, about family pressure, just about being a kid in a situation like this, in a town like this. And so I can really respect what he did with the story, and I did enjoy it. Finally, the last one, fish sticks. That has double meaning, as you know in the story. It was the day before his cousin's funeral, and Dell ended up at the Suds washing his black jeans at midnight. They were the only pants he owned that were fit for the occasion. So I love this. We have this man named Dell. His cousin Randy has died from steroid abuse, I guess. Well, not directly, but indirectly. And he couldn't get rid of this girl. Every time he dumped her off at the group home, she beat him back to his room with a fresh load of her automatic pill dispenser and another wad of clean underwear. To make matters worse, she kept bugging the shit out of him with these fish sticks she reeled up from the bottomless pond of her plastic purse. They were cold and greasy, feathered with gray lint. And even though she was probably the best woman Del Murray had ever been with, gobs of bare-knuckle sex, the latest psychotropic drugs, a government check, he was still embarrassed to be seen with her in public. Anyone who's ever dated a retard will understand what he was up against. So this is an interesting story because it's him. It's about remembering a friend, right? It's the whole thing. And he has such a really crude way of remembering his cousin, someone he went on this adventure to Florida with. But I highlighted this next thing here, Shady Glen. So we know when we looked up Knockemstiff, that was another name that it was known by. So Shady Glen Church in Christ Christian, and this is when they won their little red Bible that fell apart the first hot day. They were 8 years old. And so this is a great story, like I said, about remembrance, about friendship, about just, looking back on your life and these powerful moments that you've been through and shared with somebody else. And then, the death of this person, even though it was so far back, these memories are coming back to haunt you. And I love this. So Randy gets into bodybuilding. He starts doing some of these Atlas workouts. But then what happens is there's this novel called The Reds. I looked it up. I couldn't find it. So I imagine it's a complete fabrication. But Dell finds it. He gets obsessed with it. He starts reading it over and over and over again. And we know that it sort of ushers them into this journey to Florida. And he says, "Man, you got to read this," Dell said, waving his copy of Reds under Randy's nose. They were listening to a Hendrix album while Randy stood in front of the open window and worked out in the nude. I mean, such a weird image there. So they're talking about girls and what girls like, bullshit. Girls love muscles. What about the guy who gets sand kicked in his face down at the beach? And little do we know, they are going to the beach. They're going to Florida. And then we're back. We're back in the laundromat. And the fish stick girl took off her army jacket and loosened the belt on her shiny jeans, then got down on the floor in the laundromat amid the fuzz balls and cigarette butts and started doing stretches. And so she starts dancing, doing all kinds of weird things. But I love these brief interjections to this story. So we start in the present, and then we go to the past as Dell is remembering this story, and then we go back to the present, and we know that is where it ends. But we know when they get to Florida, they don't have any money. They have nothing they can do. They don't have a job or anything. And they meet a man named Leo who cooks hot dogs. They decide to do something in exchange for money. At least Randy does. And here Leo came to the door wearing a flowered bathrobe and a pair of old tennis shoes with the toes cut out of them. His swollen feet looked like a pair of sea urchins. Man, these descriptions are so good. I know I keep talking about it. And here is the second part of the fish stick title. What? You think I'm going to bite it off? Nibble it like a little fish stick? And I love that because, again, double meaning here. I didn't expect it. I thought the fish stick meaning was going to be the woman in the beginning, but little do we know, it pays us back. Pays us back a little bit further in. And this is weird. Yeah, basically, this man Leo, he pays them a handful of change to blow Randy. And I highlighted this moment here because I've experienced stuff like this, not being in a hotel room where my buddy's getting blown, but right here, when Dell steps away and kind of the world just where he is, like bleeds away into the distance, and you feel so detached from everything else. Then he stepped into the corner and listened to the ocean just a block away. He could hear little kids squealing in the undertow. Happy vacationers laughing in the sand. The whole world seemed louder that day at the Sea Breeze Motel. And I'm sure you've ever been somewhere like that, like especially at a hotel. Like maybe you're the only one there, or maybe you went back to get something and you're in there for a moment, all is silent, and you just hear all of the activities going on outside. And that became clear to me because I had experienced that before. And I just love these little asides that really don't seem to have much significance, but they really do when you come to think about them. And then we're back to the present when the fish stick girl asks, "What are you thinking?" She'd finished her workout and was washing her hair in one of the big metal tubs of the last of Dell's detergent. And we know what he's thinking about. He's thinking about his buddy, Randy, and what happened. But he finally admits it when she says, "Look, I told you I'm moving to that place. Suit yourself. So why did you go to Florida?" I don't know, Dale said. I read this book. I guess you could say we were looking for a better life. Did you find it? The fish stick girl asked. No, just a goddamn book. I ain't read one since. And I love that because it's almost like that is definitely a marker in his life. He's never read a novel or anything else since. And so it is very, very important to him. It is very powerful to him, that image, that object. And this is where Leo pays him. But then Randy doesn't think it's enough. And so Randy looked over at Dell and nodded because he took the lamp already. And he says, I want more, he said, and Dell swung the lamp at the fat man's head. And then the fish girl, back in the present, the fish stick girl, starts grabbing hold of one of the metal poles, and the people hang their clothes on and started twirling like a dancer in a strip club. But then later we learn that not long after Randy won the Mr. Ohio contest, Dell stopped by to ask a favor. And he's bringing up the past of what happened with a man named Leo. And he uses it as leverage. He says, look, man, I ain't never said anything about what happened in Florida. You know that? Ha! Delbert, that's all you ever talk about, Randy said. Shit. You even told Sheriff Matthews. How about 200, Dell asked. They won't let me back in my room. And we know Randy doesn't have the money despite the fact that he was a famous bodybuilder. His trophy did not pay him anything. And here we go. Eventually, Randy's heart grew too big for his body. He was one of those pincushions who never take a break, the kind that get hooked on the sides regardless of the consequences. And he's on an oxygen mask, or he's on an oxygen tank, and he wants to smoke, and he knows he's dead already. When he says, fuck that, I'm a dead man. They say my ticker's as big as football. Come on, Delbert, give me a fucking cigarette. And Del loosened the top of his restraints and handed Randy his pack. Watch that door, Randy said. That one aide is a real bitch. And I love this part too because it's sort of blending the lines or blurring the lines between fact and fiction. And so this is Randy actually bringing up the book Reds. Now that Dorsey was something else, Randy said. God, I wish I'd met her when I was benching 600. I'd have tore that up. And Dell replies, Christ, Randy, it was just a book. I mean, those people weren't real or anything. Oh, no, you're wrong, man, Randy said. They was real. More real than most shit anyway. I think about her. What's that tell you? And so I love this, how these two guys, even Randy, because at first Randy was like, I don't give a shit about that book. He was all about bodybuilding and everything. But because Delbert was obsessed with it, he got into it too. And these fictional people, they in a way became real or represented something anyway. But then Del asked, what about that old man? Do you still think about him? Jesus, Delbert, you act like that's the only thing in your life that ever happened. And I've known people like this where, you know, there's an event or there's something in their lives and they just fixate on it over and over and over again for years and years and years. And you can see here that Randy, like, he remembered this, you know, fondly, but not like Delbert. Delbert, this has really stuck with him. He's like imprisoned by it, actually. And I love this. I love the way Randy goes out. So, you know, Delbert, he leaves and, you know, Randy's smoking, but he dropped the cigarette on the bed next to the oxygen mask. A small fire erupted in the sheets. When Del grabbed the water pitcher, Randy waved him away. Get the fuck out of here, he gasped. As Del hurried out the door, he turned back to see Randy ripping up the magazine and feeding photos of his glory days into the flames. Man, it's such a beautiful, beautiful paragraph, or last line anyway. Or last few lines, I love that. I totally envision this guy sitting here. He's on his deathbed. He had these glorious bodybuilding years apparently, but now he's just in a hospital bed dying, and he's done. He wants to kill himself, and rather than going out like that, he decides to burn to death, or who knows, maybe this oxygen tank explodes. But the key thing is he turned back to see Randy ripping up the magazines and feeding the photos of his glory days to the flames. So much subtext, man. I'm loving this. But we know that the final section of the story is when Del is trying to reenact kind of what happened in the Seabreeze Motel out in Florida, where he asks the fish stick girl to give him a blowjob, and he says, hey, do it like you want some money. And she says, well, how much? He says, not much, just some change, Del answered. Placing his hands on her wet hair, he closed his eyes and began to hear the ocean off the Florida coast in the dryer's muffled rumblings. I think that would have been a great ending right there. That reads like such a great ending. But we continue on because I believe there is something left to do, and that is to take one of these fish sticks that she's been pushing on him for so long, and she shoves one in his face. Then Del hesitated, then grabbed the fish stick and bit a cold chunk off one end. It didn't taste like fish at all, but he imagined it was something else anyway, the way the devout do it with the little wafer and the grape juice. Okay, now close your eyes, she said. Del shut his eyes. Don't peek. As she pulled him down the street, he pretended not to know where they were going. She liked that. Cracking his eyes open, Del saw thick black clouds move across the sky and cover the moon like a grave blanket. He closed his eyes again and crammed the rest of the fish stick into his mouth, giving in to it. And suddenly he was very tired. He felt like the ragged ghoul staggering across the screen in an old movie. The peace he sought always out of reach. They walked on, the fish stick girl leading him by the hand. Another beautiful, beautiful story. I really love these three, particularly Schott's Bridge and Fish Sticks. Although Lard was a good one too. But let me know, what did you think of these? What was your favorite? I would have to say that Schott's Bridge was probably mine, the first one. So for next week, let's do another three. We got back team, discipline, and assailants. So I hope you are continually enjoying this read along. I'm really loving this book. I know we're only 54%, so we're about halfway through it. I am eager to find out where this thing goes next. Thanks for reading along with me. Thanks for hanging out. And I will see you guys next week. Thanks. Bye.